Hello, friends. It's Amy Register here, and you might know me from Ask a Christian, or you might just be coming across this for the first time. But we're going live just a couple minutes early, a minute early here. So if you want to skip the prelims, you sure can. You'll just want to skip in a couple minutes. But we had unfinished business from our last meeting, and so I wanted to ask Mark what we had been discussing with Doug last time. Somebody asked the question, why churches are always asking for money. Why are churches money grubbing? And I'm going to hand it to Mark and see what he has to say, and then we'll go live with the regularly scheduled program here in just a second, and we'll pause to welcome our guests. So to those of you who are already on, thanks for joining us. Mark, tell me what you think.
Well, good evening. First off, I love the way that you phrased that. Why are churches always money grubbing? I happen to be in a church right now, the church that I attend and whatnot. But yes, every week we do ask for dollars, but I'll say for a couple of reasons. One, as we said before at the end of our discussion last week, it's what God has asked us to do as far as our resources, showing that we trust God and that we want to partner with God in the mission of showing others who God is and things of that nature. And you can find that, I want to say, in chapter 5. I'm sorry, chapter 8. But more than that, I would say that on the practical side, or not more than that, but in addition to that, on the practical side, there are just practical needs that have to be met in a church when it comes to how ministry is done or sharing who God is. So whether it's on a local level or nearby, when it comes to, maybe it's printing out resources to make people get to know God better. So while this one might not have been done by a church, like sometimes our resources not as good as this one, but the road. Sometimes people do stuff like that. They have different kinds of books. Sometimes people want to hand out resources like food or water or supplies, and so that takes money. And so sometimes we don't see or realize all the things that churches do, but on the practical level, sometimes they want to help out people, whether it's getting to know God better, or if it is meeting their needs practically, or sometimes it's really having to do, or always has to do with how God has asked us to respond to show that we value, that we don't value our stuff, but that we value God's mission.
Okay. Got a little bit of theology and a little bit of practicality in there. Thanks, Mark. If you're just joining us, we just had Mark follow up with a question from last week that we didn't get to, which is why do they seem to always be money grubbing? And churches hopefully are making an impact in their community. And hopefully you are a part of a church that's making an impact in community, and that takes some dollars. Doug, hi, Doug. Doug was saying that, to run a family, there are always going to be some things you have to pay into. It takes food and water, electric. You got to keep lights on in your home and stuff like that. Hi, Fiona. So that's just kind of what we were talking about after the show last week. And so let's just start from scratch. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of folks here in the green room on the panel today, just chatting it up. And we have so many of you at home viewing. We have some new people this week. And if you haven't met me, my name is Amy from Ask a Christian, and I've got some of my friends here to talk through the road, different aspects of it. We kind of do a little highlights version. And so if you don't have this book, you can do an instant download. Hopefully our friends in the chat can find that link for you, and you can also order it from Amazon. So I just want to let you guys know that that's available. I'm going to start today, as we usually do, by asking God to bless our study. And the reason why we do that is we really think that there is a personal God out there who is involved in our life decisions. And if he's there, if he's all powerful enough to create, we believe that we have, special access to wisdom and stuff when we ask for it. So that's what we're going to do. Join me for a moment of prayer. Creator God, we've all had a busy week so far with probably some ups and downs galore. And we're just pausing tonight to have a refocus, to practice gratefulness, and to look into the inner workings of the universe and how that affects us. And tonight we're going to go into maybe some darker places than usual. We've spent the first few weeks talking about how you're a God who creates out of love and how that's gone wrong. And then how, as humans, we can be little sanctuaries on earth, kind of bringing people back in touch with you. And we're going to continue the study tonight. But God, we don't want to do it without your power, without your grace, and definitely without your understanding. So would you please give us those tonight as we get into this? Amen. All right, friends, we're on section 2 in the book, a third of the way done. We're on week number 4 tonight, and we are starting with chapter 1, part 2. It's called The War. And before I hand it over to Mark to ask some questions and get into this, then I just want to introduce a principle of Bible reading, Bible study that you may or may not know. It's called repeat and enlarge, or repeat and expand. And sometimes Bible writers, they give us a concept or a theme, like those that we've been studying so far. And then they'll revisit it, adding detail. And so I'm telling you this because that's kind of how this book is written. We've gone through the first section. Now we're going to go back and revisit some things and get greater detail. And then it's a little bit like repeat and enlarge inception, because we're going to be studying some things that will again repeat and add more detail. So just giving you that kind of knowledge that when the Bible wants to draw your attention to something, it does this little thing called repeat and enlarge. And it's a good teaching tactic. You know, it helps people refresh and remember. So somebody's sending me a text that says, "Are you in a china cabinet?" Yes, I am inside a china cabinet. I'm here in Arkansas at my parents' house, and my mom's collection is behind me. So just so you don't get distracted about it. Can't figure it out. All right. I'm going to put Mark up on here and say, Mark, my friend, take us into this first chapter, the war. Tell us about it.
So, as we stated, chapter 10, or chapter 1 in section 2, is about, it's entitled The War. And it's basically talking about how the accuser, or how the Satan basically, wreaked havoc in a perfect creation and in heaven. And so 2 of the major questions came right out of the reading. The first thing, something entitled The War. I think we've all lived through some kind of war in our lifetime. There's a war seemingly being endless. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, if this is a war, what exactly is this war over? Like, what are they fighting about? What could this personal, ever-loving God, what would somebody, or how could somebody come in and fight, or seem to wreak havoc, and how would they sit here and try to attack this kind of a God? And so the first thing is, what are they like? Is this over resources? Is this over, a person? Like, what could they be fighting about that on such a large level? And it's right here. The answer, of course, is right here. We have the answer. I think we have an idea what the answer is, but that's the first question. What is this thing about? And Amy, I don't know if I'm going to go into it right now, or if we want to open it up at this point as to what exactly. Oh,
yeah. Go for it.
Oh, I mean, and what we learn in the book is that it's basically a war over ideas. A lot of wars today are fought over politics, but ultimately they come down to ideas, and they come down to, okay, we have a better way of doing something, and that's what the original war that broke out was about. The accuser, or the Satan, thought, okay, I have a better way of doing things. The way that you're running things, I don't really care for it. And so I'm going to sit here and try to usurp this authority. And so that's ultimately what the war is about. Is God serious? It starts by asking questions. Is this really what God is asking of us? Is this fair? Does this seem to make sense to you? And so it's a war that wasn't fought, as we know, with like weapons and things like that, or at least not the weapons that we're familiar with, but weapons like insinuation and asking that. So that's the first major question. The second question, and then at this point, I'll turn back to you, Amy. It's okay with this kind of a war. How does God fight back, or how does God, overall, how would God win this war? If somebody's offering different ideas, and ultimately, it's you can't. There's a saying: a person changed against their will is of the same opinion still, meaning that you can't coerce people to change their minds. You can't make somebody change their mind. You can try to convince them, but if you strong arm somebody into changing their mind, then their mind is not really changed. And so after the accuser, the Satan basically convinced people that his way was better, God was like, okay, well, look, I will sit here and I'll show you something, which is myself, so that ultimately that my way is the best way. I'm not going to just sit here and come down and destroy you or stomp you out. I'm going to I'll show you. I won't use all the power I have. I'm just going to show you all how good I really am. And so what is this war about? How is God winning this war, or how will God be the victor of this war?
Yeah, those are good questions, Mark. Another thing I'm wondering is, does the Bible actually tell us at all what the war of these ideas are about? Do we just have vagaries? Is it that vague, or do we know that God said this and that the Satan said this? Do we have any of those things written down, or can we ascertain them? This is for everybody, by the way.
Well, maybe to extend our foundation of understanding this war. In Revelation 12, verse 7, it says, war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels fought back. In the Greek, and it's always helpful to look at the Greek and Hebrew for an understanding of what the underlying words mean. But the word for war in the Greek is polemos, of which we get polemic, politics. So it's an argument. So this is how the Bible defines war. And then Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 says, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take captive every thought to obey Christ. So the Bible itself defines this war as an argument. It's about the knowledge of God. He's been misrepresented.
Yeah, that, I'm wishing that we had more about, like, we're reading between the lines, but I wish many times that we actually had, like, okay, God said this, everyone should be kind to each other, and Satan said this. No, we shouldn't. I wish that simple that we knew exactly what it was.
God wants us to think. God wants us to think and to reason.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing. Yeah. Not that everything is black and white, but and you see this argument. That's what the devil did talking to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. You see this dialogue, this polemic that the serpent is having with Eve.
Yes, that's what I was hoping we would segue to with that question. We don't actually know what went on in heaven, but we do have some record of what the Bible authors had, some vision or some way of knowing. It's like the person who wrote Genesis, we believe, was Moses. He wasn't there. He lived later, but somehow he seemed to have insight into what this argument was really over, and that it was over God being good and Satan saying that he wasn't good. However, I wanted to bring this up because, I don't know if you've ever been friends with a Luciferian or anyone who thinks that in this situation that it is just as likely that Satan or Lucifer, as we start to call him in this chapter, could have actually been in the right, because there's no record of it. So I'm just bringing it up just to be a pot stirrer. Just it's interesting how we trace these arguments. So Mark, take us through some of that stuff that Livius was just bringing up. What the question, what the argument seemed to be about.
Well, I would say that the initial, in talking with Amy this week, the initial question, it's phrased as a question, but it's more of an implication. And we had a funny conversation, at least funny to me, and the way that she was phrasing it. If somebody asks you, if I were to ask you, is that really what you're wearing? This is what Amy came up with. It's like, okay, yes, it's a question, but there's what's the implication behind that?
Oh, Tim, you're muted. Unmute thyself.
Well, sorry about that. That's like reminiscences of Zoom meetings. What you're saying, Mark, is that you don't like what she's wearing.
Right. Who do you think you're talking to? I mean, there are questions, and I was chuckling as Amy was throwing these my way this week as far as for these, but it's like there's a real implication as far as, okay, then yes, it's a question, but the real meaning behind it. I see Rhonda was saying whatever you're wearing is not cool, or who do you think you're talking to? Like, you can't talk to me like that, or whatever else. And so the questions that Lucifer raises initially, they're not innocent questions, or I would say even sincere questions. At least what from our perspective, I'm trying to be sincere. It's more so just trying to get the pot stirred, or to make an to insinuate ideas that it's like, okay, if I say this outright, then you'll probably know that that can't be the case. But if I ask this in such a way that leaves just enough room for some level of, I don't want to say doubt, but just dropping in a bit of error, then we can maybe get this thing going. And then as we start questioning this and that, and then like I said, as war breaks out, and in this case, war being, no, I'm not going to be a part of God's government, or this thing that we want to do right here, we're going to do it a different way. And so yeah, I mean, I would say, as far as a nutshell, I don't want to get too much on a soapbox, Amy.
But if we just take the first question, did God really say? Right.
Right.
What does that really say? What is the psychological impact of that question? Well, you have to. It assumes that you know something about God. Like, did Amy really say? Well, I would have to know something about Amy. I would have to know how Amy talks, what Amy thinks about a specific subject, issue, whatever the context of the question is. So what the serpent really did was he caused a question. Well, did he, caused mistrust, right? That's the leading. That's what that question was leading to. Hey, challenge what God said.
Absolutely.
Did he really say? Are you sure he said that?
Yeah.
Do you really know him? Did he really say that?
I really don't want to offend the teenage girls who are on here tonight, but I hear it in an annoying teenage girl voice, like, oh my gosh, did your mom really say that we couldn't go to the mall? That's how I hear it. It is just like, oh, what a terrible mom. That's really what you're saying. What a terrible mom.
I think that in the case of Satan and Eve, I think human nature, right? We don't want to be confused, or we don't want to say, I don't know. Right? We want to act like we know something. So then she kind of just decided to go along instead of relying on the relationship that she had with God up to that time to say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to go ask God. I'm going to go check this out with him.
Yeah, that would have been great. Just for sake of time, let's move along, Mark, to how God fights back. What are God's options for dealing with rebels?
Well, one option is how we deal with rebels here on earth. You could just try to stomp them out. But that goes back to what we said earlier, as far as, I mean, God could say, no, you're going to get in line. But that would leave the question hanging out there. And that, as Levi's kind of said, and then and I think it said in the chat, we might start thinking, based off our own reasoning, wait, is this really the case? Or maybe this is how it really is. God not being reliable, God not, being who God says that God is. And like we said, a person changed against their will is of the same opinion still, meaning that basically if God just stomps out this rebellion, then it might mean that we have the same thoughts and we might be prone to repeat the same thing. So God, instead of just stomping it out or God just wiping away and starting over, God says, okay, look, I'm going to show you that this is not what I'm like, or that what I've suggested or said is actually the best way, and the best way that this government should run, and it's the best government for us. And so God, basically becomes even that much more personal with us, or continues to do that, and then showing us what God is actually like. And that way there's no need to question God's character, because we would have seen, okay, then, seen up close, walked with God, heard from God. And so that way, when I said, did God really say this? We can say with certainty, God did not say that. Or God actually said this, and this is why, as opposed to having to wonder why God said it or what God actually said.
Yeah. I think we flashed Fiona's comment up there. She's just remarking on how kind of genius it is to let a person to insinuate something and let someone come to their own conclusions, because nobody likes to be told what to think or what to do, even early mankind, right? So yeah, that was pretty smart. And the way that God fights back cannot be a short game. Like you're saying, like, it cannot be a short game, because nobody likes that authoritarian figure. Nobody likes somebody who takes action without understanding. So that's where you get the cry from your kids, Dad, that's not fair. You don't understand me. You just don't understand me. And so if God were to stomp it out immediately, all other life forms in the universe would be like, oh, maybe there was something to that. He really doesn't seem fair. So in order for him to gain our trust, to continue being a trustworthy God, he's got to play the long game, showing, like Mark said, who he really is, letting us see and experience him. So that's the question a lot of people ask. I get that probably once a month on the channel, is why didn't God just stop sin? Why didn't he just squash Satan and quit the rebellion? But if you saw that and you didn't understand God, you would think, yeah, there was something to that, and it casts a lot of suspicion. I don't know if you guys watch the news, but that's the kind of world that we're living in right now. People try to block stuff on YouTube or Facebook. It's too much censorship, makes people distrust. Better to have all the ideas and info out there and be able to measure it yourself. So,
Amy, I noticed one thing about the interaction with the Satan figure, the serpent that shows up in Genesis 3. Eventually, he just flat out made an assertion, and it was directly contrary to what God had said. So at least one of them's not telling the truth. So we still have that same problem now. When you encounter two people and they're saying diametrically opposed things, then you have to decide which one you're going to believe. And then the issue is, well, how do you make decisions in a case like that?
How do you?
I guess one way is to say, like, first of all, do you have already experience with the persons that are telling you this and their previous reliability? Do you already have also experience with similar kinds of assertions, and were they led? In Eve's case, she didn't have a lot of experience other than knowing that God had given her everything. And really, if a God is going to be a God, he has to have the ability to give direction to your life. He only withheld one thing, right? So basically what she concluded is, I don't want a God over my life. And that I guess that feeling is still rampant in our species.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I would argue that he did not withhold even one thing. He did not withhold the tree. Out of every tree you may eat. He simply described, I want to propose that he described the consequence of what would happen if you ate from that tree, but she was free to eat. And Satan challenged the consequence.
He did.
Yeah. He said, oh, you won't really die like what God said. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? I love it. If I can go a little deeper and in this thinking of what goes in our minds, from a lesson from a while back, Aristotle, Greek philosopher, essentially says you can change a person's mind when three things are in place. Number one, it's a person who has credibility with you. That's the trust element. It's a person who over time has gained your trust, and so you tend to accept what they say, whether or not you know the details of the facts. They say, this is a trustworthy person, this is a credible person, a believable person. Number two, second part of persuasion, is the logic of the argument. Does the person have a logical, believable argument for what they want you to accept? This is where Satan injected himself, right? She clearly knew God, and so Satan was at a disadvantage with step one. But step two, he challenged this, because he ate the fruit and now he can talk, right? So he kind of had direct evidence. And the third piece of Aristotle is the appeal to self-interest or emotion. And this is where we have failed.
Well, that's where I fail.
Right.
Well, yeah.
You know, she had the desire to make one wise. And so she took of it and she ate.
Yeah. Thanks, Livius. That was an unexpected delve into philosophy. Just watching the time here, wanting to kind of wrap up this chapter. So in the narrative that we've been studying, this overarching narrative, by the way, if you're just joining us, I saw 3 people just jump on. If you're just joining us, we are finishing up the first chapter of section 2 in the road. And we've been talking a little bit about some of the ideas behind how Satan or the Satan tricked Eve and Adam into rebellion. But it wasn't a huge trick like Livius just brings up. It was really a desire that Eve already had that was exposed through this discussion. But so to continue the narrative, God has a plan to reveal his true self throughout history, not just to Adam and Eve and their direct offspring, but to keep doing this until the world becomes illuminated by his character. Now, Satan hasn't given up the fight. He hasn't been like, oh, okay, yeah, I was wrong, you were right. He continues to tell and spread lies about the character of God. And the reason why this is important to us, the reason why this is worth studying, is because if you've ever asked the question, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? Then you can trace all of that back. In the Christian story, you can trace all of that back to this good versus evil war. This war of Satan trying to tell people they don't need God, don't need to rely on him, shouldn't be interested in him, and God trying to not just reveal himself, but reveal himself through these people who have become his little sanctuaries on earth. That's you and me. So pain and suffering goes back to this, the downfall of genetics, the downfall of trust. All of these things can be traced back to this point in the story. And God's point, if you continue to read that chapter, it's 108 in the physical copy of the book and very similar in the ebook. God ends up calling out a specific people group. We know them as Israel, or later the Jewish nation. God calls out a specific people group that he says, I want you above all else. I want you to follow who I am, because if you do that, people will see my goodness. So again, God using humanity, wanting to be with us and use us as part of the solution to this problem. And then we don't have a whole lot of room or time in the book, but at some point, the Jewish nation does not realize that Jesus, the Christ, is who they have been waiting for. And this torch gets passed to the Christian church, comprised of some Jewish people, by the way. Just not as a nation, they don't come over. So the book ends by talking about how the church is a continuation of these people. These people are supposed to bear the light and the character of God. Now, do you think that Satan is done? Is this where he gives up? Not so much. All right. Any last comments on this chapter or things we left out, Mark or anyone else? Right. I think the one thing that I wanted to say about this chapter is, there have been all kinds of different lies told about who God is. If I asked you guys to type some in, it might, I don't know what you'd come up with, but, some of the ones that we might have heard growing up is that God is arbitrary, or, that he burns people forever as a punishment for even the tiniest thing, or, stuff like that. And all of those originate with Satan. All of those originate with the guy who's trying to make God look bad. And this is the part I wanted to say. If you are uninterested in a God who is arbitrary or rulemaking or seems coercive, then I'm with you. If you're not interested in that God, then you are closer to the truth about God's character than maybe even some Christians. And yeah, a tyrant, Rhonda says. So every person who rebels against ugly pictures of God is actually closer to God than that person even knows themselves. So God's saying, yes, you get it. You get me. And so in that way, we have a lot of ways that we can agree with atheists and agnostics. People just say, I don't know. I don't know if I even like him. So, all right, let's go on to chapter 2 in this section called The Empires. In the last chapter, we're talking about this war between Satan, or Lucifer, the book starts calling him. And we see that Lucifer hates the truth about who God is and has been continuing to wage a war of ideas and beliefs against God's character and his government. His goal is to spread as many lies about who God really is in order to keep humans from loving him. That's ultimately his goal, and this rebellion causes pain and suffering. So we're going to get into a short look at history. Some of you really enjoy history. I've talked to some of you separately and have even done this Bible study with a few of you before. But we're going to get into something that's both historical, and the book uses the word apocalyptic. Do you guys know what apocalyptic means? Is that a term that we should probably define? Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Originally, apocalyptic was kind of the same word as revelation. So if you've heard of the book Revelation in the Bible, it's supposed to be a revealing, but now we kind of use it as sort of like an end time word. Like, oh, the world is ending. Oh, this apocalyptic movie. Yes, Fiona, related to the apocalypse. So
You mean the revealing?
yes, the revealing. It should be the revealing or the revelation, but yes, we do kind of mean it as the destruction or the end of the world, because that book has some nod to that. But what we're going to be talking about for a couple minutes here is revealing that the Bible sort of refers to using the word prophecy. So you might have heard the word prophecy. And we're just going to talk about a Bible prophecy where God is giving a timeline for this war that we've been talking about, how the war is going to proceed through the ages. So I don't know if you guys have your book open or a Bible, but I'm just going to run through the story really quickly. There is a young man, a young Hebrew named Daniel, who is taken captive by one of the earth's first major mega powers, Babylon. And when he gets taken captive, he and some of his friends, they're the elite, the intelligentsia of the area. And something cool is happening at this time where not every captive is slaughtered, but they start to assimilate them. They think, okay, these Hebrews are smart and strong and awesome, and so we're going to take the best of the best, bring them back to our kingdom, and it's going to enhance our kingdom. These captives, we'll teach them our language, we'll teach them about our gods, and that's how we're going to enrich our own little corner of the world. So Daniel and his friends get taken captive, and they're taught to be Babylonians. And at some point in this journey, the king of Babylon has a dream that's really troubling to him. He can't remember it, but he knows that it was messed up. And so because he is the king and he has on staff hundreds of people who are kind of like spiritual advisors, he starts calling everybody in and saying, look, I cannot remember this dream, but it was really troubling. Can you tell it to me? And what do the guys say? Those of you who know the story, tell me what all these guys here on the royal payroll say back to the king.
Well, they're saying you're asking for something that nobody can do. It's too hard.
Yeah.
It's too hard for anybody.
Tell us, and we can tell you the interpretation.
Right. They act like our modern fortune tellers. If you will just tell me, show me your palm, and we'll tell you what the lines mean. But none of them could draw your palm. So they're kind of hemming and hawing, and they say, look, you could pay us all you want. This is not something that's possible for us. And so Daniel, Doug, thank you. Daniel steps in and he says, look, I'm going to pray about it. He and his friends go and pray to the God of heaven, and the meaning of this dream is revealed. Long story short, what it ends up being is one of the most very interesting things about Christian scripture is that from beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, going all the way down to the end of the world, Daniel predicts the succession of world powers in that area. So starting at 605 BC, Babylon is in charge. It ends up that the king had seen this dream of a giant statue. The head represented his own kingdom, Babylon. It was a head of gold. The arms and chest represented the kingdom of Persia that was going to take over after Babylon. The belly and thighs of bronze in this statue represented Greece. By the way, I know that if you're maybe over the age of 15 or 20, you may have enjoyed the film 300, which kind of outlines some of the major strategic changes between Persia and Greece. And then finally, everybody knows the Roman Empire. It was represented by the long legs of iron in this dream. And then the feet of iron and clay represent modern Europe, or some people say the divided nations of Europe. And so Daniel gives this prophecy to the king. And we usually use this section to like prove the Bible or say how awesome the Bible is. And that's fantastic. It works that way. But there's something else that I think is really fascinating about what this dream teaches us about God. If you step into the mind and heart of a God who wants you to know how the world is going to go, what could you imagine that God would be trying to do for you or teach you or tell you? If there was a God who wanted to convey information to you and used a succession of world powers to do so, what would you think about that God? What does that do for you? Does that do anything for you as a spiritual person?
Amy, I think for some people it wouldn't do much because they're not that interested in world powers and history. But imagine that you're a king of a world power and you're constantly paranoid that other people are trying to unseat you from power. That might be a really interesting dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe you just live life and take one day at a time. But for those of us who are struggling, for those of us who are wondering what's next, yes, thank you, Rhonda. For those of us who are frustrated with the politics, just to know that God says there's an end to injustice, that there's an end to coercive takeover. It might be it might be a sigh of relief. It might be something that attracts us to God. You guys know what decision our justice system came to yesterday at about, what was it, about 4:00 Eastern time. You were tuned in, right? I'm guessing you were. Yeah. So did this decision fix everything in the world? Did finding somebody guilty on all counts make everything suddenly better with race relations in our nation or around the world? Clearly not.
Nope.
So for those of us who are sick and tired of, waiting for there to be a final day of justice, to know that it's a few empires away, there's some relief in that. I think especially for our young people who've grown up with like more interest in social justice than ever before. So there's a paragraph on page 117 of your book, or it's the last page of the second chapter. I just want to read this. It says, Daniel had just opened the veil to Nebuchadnezzar. His kingdom would be just like the others. Proud as he may be of his accomplishments, he arrived at his stature only by climbing up the mountain of bodies his armies had littered across the soil. And very soon another would come do the same to him, then another and another. Finally, the kingdom of Rome, mightier than the rest, would never be replaced by another kingdom, but it would be divided to not be united again. God's saying every kingdom of man will fall. The best we can do is still, hurt and destroy and coerce our way to power. But in this vision, we can compare the kingdom of man, which will eventually have an end. It's built on selfishness, to the kingdom of God, which is built on other-centered love, which will have no end. And so that's the long game. That's the long game that God has been talking about. I'm going to reveal myself to you through nation after nation. And then finally, when you realize you're never going to get it, when you realize you're never going to be able to overcome because of the selfishness of the human heart, then I'm going to be able to come in and do something awesome to end this war once and for all. Now, how does this vision of the two types of kingdoms, how does this understanding of man's kingdom versus God's kingdom influence how you feel now about the world you're living in? I'd love to hear from some of you.
It really gives me great hope and peace of mind, just knowing that, right? That this is not it. This is not our final destination, that God has so much more with his love and grace that he has for us. So that's what kind of keeps me going.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. All right, let's head on to the final chapter. This was such an important concept in the Bible. This was such an important idea that God had Daniel tell it twice. So the king not only saw this head of gold and, chest of silver, Daniel had another dream that coincided with this. And we find that out a little bit later, but the dream is of 4 beasts. First, he dreams of a lion standing on 2 feet with eagle's wings. Then he sees a bear raised up with 3 ribs. And it says, arise and devour much flesh, all these weird cryptic things. Then there's a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And to him, dominion was given over all the earth. And then finally, we have a 4th beast, which is extra weird for some reason. And we'll break that down in just a second. But when Daniel has this vision, it is so bizarre when he comes to this 4th beast. It was crushing, it was trampling, it was really scary. It doesn't say that the other beasts scared him at all. And while I, hear myself saying this, I want to remind you guys that that God does interesting things to get our attention, and that these beasts are not real beasts or anything that will be running through our world anytime soon, except that it is representative of the different kingdoms or different powers that are on the earth. And so we want to take a look a little bit at that 4th beast and some of the history here. Now, if you have read the book or read this in the Bible in the book of Daniel, you will know what these beasts represent. And so I'm wondering if you guys have any insights about how we know which beast represents which nation, or how we know that the beasts coincide with this first statue, this first dream that Nebuchadnezzar has.
One suggestion, Amy, goes back to your repeat and expand notion. So we don't have, when the vision is first given, it's just given. But we get a glimpse of how God is dealing with the King Nebuchadnezzar in this book, because he keeps coming back with dreams. He didn't give him just one about a statue. After there was a little incident with Nebuchadnezzar trying to make his own statue that contradicted the teaching of Daniel in the first statue, God came back with another dream that dealt with the fundamental problem that Nebuchadnezzar displayed about the first statue.
Yes.
And so it seems like God uses the power that he's given Daniel to teach this king and this kingdom about what he's like, and displaying the 2 types of kingdoms there are in this world, like you mentioned,
Yes.
the kingdom of other-centered, self-sacrificing love, and the kingdom of I take what I want by force.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. In the last few minutes, I want to explore this fourth beast a little bit. For those of you who are new to Bible reading, or haven't dipped a toe into what the Bible calls prophecy, the reason why we're focusing on this is because it does become a theme in the Bible. It's this, like Tim's saying, or like we mentioned before, it's these two kingdoms, and they're opposed in how they want to run things. And, this is what Lucifer was, or Satan was saying from the beginning. I don't like God's kingdom. I'm going to try to set up my own. And so these kingdoms are pitted against each other the whole time in the Bible. And this beast imagery comes up regularly. So we're spending some time here, just reminding you, we're spending some time here because as you study the Bible on your own, as you read things, you're going to come across concepts of different beasts. And as we highlight these, you're going to be thinking to yourself, oh man, I've read that before. I studied that before in Daniel. I know some of these characteristics. So, just jumping ahead because we don't have time to make the arguments ourselves in the time that we're given here this hour. We find out that with the repeat and enlarge, we end up that this final beast, this fourth beast, represents the Roman Empire. And in verses 19 through 25, Daniel has special information. He gets special knowledge about some markers of what this beast is like. And by the way, shortcut is, a beast always represents a kingdom or a power in Bible prophecy. And so as we look at this kingdom or power that we call the fourth beast, what is it? What clues do we have? What do we know about it? If you guys have your Bibles open in chapter 7, 19 through 25, hit me with some of the things that we know about the beast here. Want me to start you off so you know what I'm talking about?
I think we're all still flipping to Daniel.
Oh, we have some participation from the at-home crew. Thank you, Gina. It's going to have teeth of iron. By the way, does that coordinate with what we saw about the fourth kingdom on the statue, the legs of iron? We have the same metal representation. Nails of bronze. Thank you, Gina. And Fiona, iron teeth and bronze claws. We know that there's something special about how it acts. The other beasts seem to be pretty docile, but this one has some verbiage that sounds violent. Do you guys see some of those words?
Yeah. Devour.
Yeah, we have a devouring one. What else? Yes, crushed, trampled. Yes, thank you guys. That's what I was looking for. So this one seems to be mightier and more terrifying in its grip on humanity. And then we get some other imagery about this beast having 10 horns or 10 kingdoms that end up coming up from out of its head. And then there is a little horn that we read about later. It says a king or a little horn comes up from among it and subdues 3 kings. By the way, these are all just puzzle pieces. If you're wondering who the Bible is talking about, if you're wondering how this plays into the war, what we're talking about here, just a reminder, is this is the final kingdom on earth. This is the final kingdom before God comes back and says the war is over. So if we can identify who this is correctly, of course, we've already given away and said it's Rome. But if we can convince ourselves that that's true, then we'll have a little bit of a jump on, like we were talking about, just kind of knowing what's coming Earth's way. So, what other clues do we have about this little horn that comes up from among the 10 horns in this story? Oh, Tim, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I think it displaces some other horns, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The horn just pops the other guys right out of there.
Like getting your adult tooth and the baby teeth are gone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Do you guys see where it says that it speaks words against the Most High? Or some version of that in your Bible? Yeah, that's a clue to who this horn is and what's going down at the end of this war. Hi, Brent. If it has nails of bronze, does that mean it has elements of the kingdom before that? Since Greece is the thighs, the belly and thighs of bronze. You know what? I'll have to ask a Bible scholar on that, but it does seem to lend itself to that very well. There was a lot of overlap between the ideals of Greece and Rome. Honor culture being one of the things that I've studied lately. Spoke boastfully, yes. And then there's a weird thing in there that says that this power, this little horn power, seeks to change times and laws, and that it's going to rule for a time, and half of times. And then God's kingdom is going to come and shut it down, basically. So I'm just watching the clock here. But if you turn to page 125 of your book, or the very end of this chapter 3, I'll just read a little paragraph here. It says, the phrase time, times, and a half a time is an Aramaic phrase. That's a language that was spoken in Bible times. It literally means year, years, and half a year. So people who were reading this, people who have, wanted to do Bible study for a long time, would read this and they would say, okay, well, we think this is Rome and something coming out of Rome, but what power ruled for a year, 2 years, and half a year? What power ruled for 3.5 years? And they couldn't find anything. And then someone made the discovery. I don't know if anyone can flip to Numbers 14, 33, and 34, and then someone else could get Ezekiel 4, 4, and 6. There's another principle here of Bible prophecy that we want to discuss tonight. And it's just like it's just an interesting bit that could help us understand this final puzzle. Numbers 14, 33, 34. If you're at home, you can copy and paste and post in the chat. And if you are in the green room, feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you, Fiona. All right, so we see in this story that there is a day, 40 days, representing 40 years. If you look at verse 34, it says, for 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins. So anybody else have the other one? Ezekiel 4, 4 through 6. I mean, yeah, 4 through 6.
If I can just read it.
All right.
Then lie, Ezekiel 4, 4 through 6, in NRSV. Then lie on your left side and place the punishment of the house of Israel upon it. You shall bear their punishment for the number of the days that you lie there. For I assign to you a number of days, 390 days, equal to the number of the years of their punishment. So you shall bear the punishment of the house of Israel. When you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the punishment of the house of Judah. 40 days I assign you, 1 day for each year.
All right. Thank you, Mark. The reason why we bring this up is because a lot of the Bible is written representatively. And so we come across this principle where a day represents a year. When it's talking about things that God's going to do and it's talking about Bible prophecy, it's just a principle that we see. And so if you were to apply this to this vision that Daniel had and this power who is going to be in power for 3.5 years in here, if you expanded that and applied this prophetic teaching, you would come to 1,260 days or 1,260 years if you applied that. And history confirms that there is a kingdom that came up from Europe, that came up after Rome was divided and ruled that long and did some of the things that this beast is said to have done, oppressing people, speaking against God and the Most High. But we don't want to get caught up in. Yes, that's right. Thank you, Brent. The Jewish calendar is a little bit different than the Western calendar. Thank you. I totally forgot to mention that. But anyway, we don't want to get caught up in the details right now of worrying about exactly who this was. But the sad part about it, my friends, is that this was actually Christianity. Roman Christianity, after we got away from the apostolic faith, the people who had contact with Jesus and had contact with the apostles, and as soon as that was kind of lost, then you notice like people start to have some of their own ideas and go their own ways, and they start actually persecuting each other. Now, I would like to say that all of that is in the past and that Christians don't act like that anymore. But the Christian church fits this other horn description. By AD 400, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. And the reason why it was so different from any of the kingdoms that had come before is that this power was both political and religious. And this is terrifying. Guys, this is why the U.S. was founded on the principles of non-coercive religion, because these early Christians were saying that not only, did you have to do what they say civically or you'd be punished, but they were actually threatening your salvation as well. So anyway, you can check out the book if you want to get into deeper on who this was and some of the proofs that match up with the clues that were given in the Bible. But it was not a good time. So what was going on is they started to substitute the love and the goodness and the free grace of God with works-based religion. So tying all of this into the beginning of this story tonight is that these are some of the lies that Satan has perpetuated, made the church look awful, saying you need to work your way to salvation. You're not doing enough work. It's all on you. God will not accept you unless you do work. Or have you ever seen some of the religions or cultures that think that you have to climb steps till your knees are bloody or beat yourself to win God's favor? These are some of the lies. This is some of the war still in place even today. So the end result is that the story of God is love was replaced by a false story that represented God as angry and judgmental. And we are still fighting that public relations battle today. So, yeah, I think some of my final questions to wrap up here are, how do you relate to some of these lies that were perpetuated throughout history? Have you ever fallen into the thought process that you need to be better before you seek out the God of love? Have you ever thought that maybe you need to punish yourself or that God is punishing you? Does anyone have experience about overcoming some of those things? Maybe it gets a little personal there.
I have something to offer. This a little tangential, but it's similar, Amy.
Yes, please.
Sometimes Christians can fall into something that's very similar. They believe that they can come to God because of what Jesus has done by his grace. But then once they're there, they got to do all these things to stay in his good graces. They make lists of things they got to do. And if they fail on one of them, they think, oh no, maybe God's going to kick me out. I've definitely fallen into that.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll just tell a personal story on myself. There was one week, even in this last year, where I felt like I had failed so miserably at a relationship issue. And I was coming into church to like lead out or do offering call or something little. And I sat in the parking lot crying because I just felt so unworthy to represent God. And I felt like the thing that I had done was driving me so far away from him. And then I'm like, what are you thinking, Bridgester? This is the place where your faith can actually shine. Like, these are the things that you've been telling people about your whole adult life. Now you live up to it. You take the knowledge of who God really is and you walk in and grab onto it. And so I was able to, but it was really after a lot of, pep talk to myself and prayer through it. So I totally understand that. And I think our natural bend is to feel that way, is to feel like we need to do something to earn our way back. I don't think it's a stretch that Satan had to work really, really hard to get us to believe that. We already feel awful. So, yeah, just in closing, I want to go back to the original thought, which is that we are at war, that Satan will do anything that he can to make God not look good. He's still got something to prove. Even today, he's still got something to prove and wants to make God, Christianity, the church unattractive. He wins when that happens. And sometimes it seems like he doesn't need a ton of help. We are hypocritical. We do struggle with sin. And it's hard to recover from. I'm going to read this summary here. It says, a few decades after the last of the apostles died, the church took a dive. The gospel was distorted into a religious institution. Grace was erased, the story of God replaced by a counter-narrative that misrepresented his character. The serpent's lies in Eden now infiltrated the church and became its narrative. And the question that is part of the story forces us to think about this. How long? How long would God allow injustice to move so freely? How long would the church get away with its lies? How long until he finally fought back? How long would it be until the lies were exposed, the gospel restored, and the truth about his character of love introduced to the world? So that's where we'll leave it. Fortunately for us, we do have a little bit of a timeline. So that's it for tonight. Anybody have any closing comments? All right, then. Well, I want to thank you guys for your participation, both at home and here in the green room. I guess we're all at home, but thank you for liking my china cabinet, and we'll see you back next week for a little bit more Bible prophecy, a little bit more trying to understand the character of God in this war and how God's going to finally bring us out. We'll do a little bit more repeat and enlarge next week. So thank you guys. See you next time.
Cool. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Fiona. Bye, Gina.